So I'm going to put it this way. I'm ignorant of many things, including quantum mechanics and the whole. Well, but if I understand it right, I'm going to put it this way. I will speak like an ignorant amateur about quantum mechanics, and I'll say that here we are in a field of probabilities and possibilities. And I would say, the Alexander technique is like a field of possibilities and probabilities that is somewhat different from the field of, say, psychoanalysis or Catholicism or engineering or any other field. But that field, that vast field of possibilities, you visit that field, or you enter it, or you dwell in it, and there are a whole bunch of possibilities. And out of those possibilities, you make some sort of assessment where you say, I think in this field of possibilities, I detect this as a possible principle that could guide me in some way. And that means that the very principles of the Alexander technique do not exist objectively. They are conclusions that some people make relative to the possibilities in that field. And that means that the very terms inhibition and direction, I think they don't exist objectively. They only exist subjectively. And that means that if you throw in your question, if you throw inhibition and direction at me, I say, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not absolutely sure that you and I mean the same thing regarding those words. Right? So if we agree that this is very subjective and a bit vaguely defined, I would put it like this. I will try to put it like this. First, I don't think of myself as a teacher. I think of myself as a learner. I love to learn. I'm always learning. I'm learning all day long. And sometimes I learn in the company of other people, either on a one-to-one basis or in a group. And then here we are learning together. And that some people are coming into my life to teach me something about myself, or about the piano or the guitar or the voice, or about writing, or about moral issues or metaphysics. So the person comes along, and this person and I will learn together. So already I don't think I'm a teacher to begin with. I don't feel that way. I'm a learner, and I think generally a good learner. And I share my learning with the person who calls himself or herself my student, but in fact, we're just collaborating and learning together, right? And in that learning, that learning is a kind of an ocean with waves and with tides. And in some of those waves, in the learning, there's something that may look like a traditional Alexander lesson, but it's just some wave in my learning where with some student, I might do something like this. But I could go for days or sometimes weeks without doing something like this, or without really thinking and talking about it. And that means that it's difficult for me to say whether or not I teach inhibition and direction. First, because I don't think I'm a teacher. Second, because I think those terms can be defined very, very, very differently. And third, because I'm sort of a Neoplatonian Jungian or something like this. And I believe in archetypes. And I would say an archetype is a very difficult, it's an energy, a possibility, it's a vast thing that will manifest itself. To give a very banal example, we could talk about the archetype of red. That's going to manifest itself as the red rose and the red sunset and the red shirt and the red blood. And those are manifestations of redness or something like this.
Right.
And I believe that there may be some archetypical energy of something that manifests itself, say, as what you might call inhibition. And that same archetype could be called waiting, could be called letting go, could be called emptying your mind, could be called Zen, could be called Tao, could be called Confucius. I mean, it can receive a lot of different names. And first you have to sense the thing, and then you have to have some sort of definition. and then you have to embody it, and then you have to share it.
Yeah.
And I think I probably share my understanding of inhibition, although I almost never call it inhibition unless the student has read some book about the Alexander technique.
Yeah.
Then I might, but not otherwise.
Yeah, I see. So, I mean, if somebody comes to you, I mean, are they coming from a particular place, or and what sort of people are coming to you? I mean, as an Alexander technique practitioner here in the UK, people are often coming to me just for back pain, or they're coming perhaps with a particular vocal problem, or they're a pianist, and they've heard that the Alexander technique can help them play in a more free way. So, I mean, is that the same for you, or are you? I mean, you probably have quite a lot more sort of contacts through your music and things like that than I might have. So you might have people coming from the university that you work in, and or something like this. I mean, how does that work for you?
All right. Again, I'm going to take a little parenthesis.
Yeah.
And I will talk very informally. I'll try to be brief about fate and destiny.
One of my favorite subjects.
That's right. Yeah. And, fate brings two people together, sometimes for reasons that to begin with, they don't fully understand. And once they are brought together through fate, because of reasons that they may not necessarily understand, a dialogue starts. And perhaps shortly afterwards, the two people move apart and they say, our meeting was not to be, or our meeting was not timed correctly, or not here, not now, or not with this guy. Forget about him, he's crazy. So, people enter your orbit through a mechanism that's very difficult to discern. Ostensibly, they hear something, they say backache, or they say posture, or they say breathing, or they say physical this, or they say Alexander technique. But in fact, most people with whom I have meaningful interactions, fate has pushed them my way for me to learn something from them. And we're going to collaborate in ways that to begin with, we can't even really plan or define. So we're going to do something together.
Yes.
I would say that people who have thoughts of the type Alexander technique, posture, relaxation, they are making assumptions. And as Don Miguel Ruiz said, be impeccable with your word, try your best, don't take things personally, make no assumptions. Yeah. So they are assuming that the Alexander technique is about physical relaxation. They assume that I do that as a professional, and they assume that they themselves need to learn that.
Sure.
And those are assumptions. Reality may confirm those assumptions or may deny them.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So from time to time, somebody comes to see me because of these assumptions, and either we're going to have a meaningful dialogue from learner to learner, or the person's going to say, Pedro, Monsieur Alcantara, I've come to you for posture and physical relaxation, and I don't understand a word of what you're saying. And I think I will not come back next week. Bye-bye. Or somebody comes with these assumptions, and the encounter is very meaningful, and the person evacuates those assumptions and immediately starts learning something that for him or for her is very, very useful. Something that the person could want to call Alexander technique, although I myself wouldn't.
Sure.
So I have long-term students who are convinced that we've been doing the Alexander technique, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, on that note, obviously, I think I want to talk a bit more about your approach to creativity. Not least of all because I've always been rather hung up about it. I play flute, piano, guitar. I like to write, or I like to write poetry, but all of it's really just within my own space. I'm not somebody to want to push that out. I used to be an actor. The only time I've ever really shared my creativity was as an actor. But I think I'm really deeply insecure about my creativity. I grew up in a way where if you drew a picture, somebody might say, it's not very good, is it?
Mm-hmm.
And I was, in fact, quite maltreated, actually, as a young person like that. And I think that's affected my creativity. Now, obviously, the healing journey would help me with that. I mean, what do you think about that?
All right, I'm going to put it this way. You have just spoken for, let's say, 45 seconds or 60 seconds, and you have raised a tremendous number of very important and interrelated subjects. Creativity itself, the one once brought up, the passage from the private to the public sphere. It's just a lot of stuff. It's so much stuff that I have to make some sort of choice and say, you have overexcited my mind and my heart, and I want to say many things, and we don't have time, so I have to pick one thread and develop that one thread. And my choice is to propose a way of thinking about creativity that compares two models of creativity. One says creativity is something that is inside of you. It is a capability, like something that you own and that you can develop. So something inside of you that you develop. Another way of defining creativity is to say creativity is the creative source is all around us. It's eternally there. You're surrounded by the sea of creativity. And the thing for you to do is to become available to it. And that means that the creativity doesn't really reside inside of you. It resides outside of you. You become available and it passes through you. And it's a wonderful thing when it passes through you. You feel very fertile, and it's just a wonderful experience of that creativity passing through me, and then it can go out. So what has been very helpful for me is to realize that I'm not creative, I am available. And people who think that they are not creative, the real problem is that they are not available.
Yeah.
And the answer then is forget about becoming creative. All you have to do is to find ways of becoming available. Yeah. And those ways could be called the inhibitional direction, or it could be called this, or hypnosis and whatnot. Something that you have inside of you, but just an availability for things to pass through you. If you think this way, you will soon notice, I think, that creativity is endless, it is universal, it is infinite, it's eternal. And if you're available, it means that you're permanently creative and you never run out of ideas because those things are just passing through you. And another merit in this idea is that I don't feel that I am the owner of my creative thoughts. They're passing through me, and because I don't feel ownership, I can be very free about it. It passes through me, I share it, and I feel good that it passed through me and I shared. And I think that's a very good way of overcoming certain blockages.
Yes, well, I think it is blockages, isn't it? And I think it's very interesting because one of the things that I've noticed about yourself is that you have written a lot of books. I mean, you've also written 2 children's books, and you're now currently working on a novel, I understand. I mean, that is quite a lot of creativity. And obviously, in the end, you can say that you've been somebody who's created quite a lot of a body of work. What do you think is perhaps the fundamental issue with people that, I mean, you know, as you say yourself, we're all creative. Why is it that some people can't fulfill their potential in this way? I mean, apart from the fact that, of course, what you're talking about there is the, you know, if it's too personal and if there's too much baggage and you're sort of run down by the fact that I've got to create something, and that creates a kind of blockage. But I mean, what do you think is because there are great artists even that have produced 1 or 2 films or 1 or 2 books, and yet and there are sort of people like Woody Allen who just consistently make films and people like that. You know, what is going on there, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, what you're talking about is a very complex issue, and I mean, it becomes difficult to say something brief and intelligent about it because the issue is vast, it's very complex.
Yeah.
So I make a choice. I pull a strand, knowing full well that I'm not addressing all the 23 other strands. I'm just saying, let me pick on this one thing here, right? Yeah. So I will reply in a very incomplete and incoherent manner. And I'm now rereading. I'm reading for the third time a novel by a Mexican writer called Juan Rulfo, who wrote a novel called Pedro Paramo. And Rulfo wrote a bunch of short stories. I have his short stories as well. And the novel is absolutely remarkable. It's a short novel, but it says a lot of things. It's very powerful. It's very well done. It's fantastic. It is highly praised by other writers. Some, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Colombian writer, says, when I read the novel the whole year, that's all I did was to reread that novel. Was the best thing ever.
Wow.
So it's a fantastic short little novel. And Juan Rulfo was very uncomfortable with this. He was uncomfortable with the praise, and he was uncomfortable with the expectation that he would or should then write another book. And he's dead. He's not here to talk, and we don't know what was in his heart. But let's raise a possibility. He received from the creative source an amazing gift, and he shared that gift with the public. An amazing novel, Pedro Paramo. I think it's really quite something. And having been the recipient of an amazing gift, either he said, this is too powerful a feeling and I cannot cope with receiving another gift from the creative source, it's just too much. Or he could have said, maybe he was thinking, I have received it, I've done it, and it's now over. Now, you see, I'm not really answering your question about the blockages and why some people write a lot and others don't. Woody Allen does this. It's too complicated. So I said, let me just say something about a writer who wrote one fantastic book, plus short stories, also fantastic, and who became seemingly incapable of writing another book. He had a meaningful life, did many other things. But I would say that to have something big pass through you is not easy.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think of a lot of people that I meet who are incredibly creative, but they don't paint or they don't write poetry. I mean, for me, creativity, can happen in the kitchen cooking some food, or it can happen in the way that you manage your family, or, I think also, there is this thing about creativity being, a big, profound word, and it's a very scary thing for a lot of us, And actually, the truth is that most people are actually creative in their own area. And for a lot of people, they may be not thinking that they can play the piano at home unless they can do a big concert. And of course, that is crazy, because I am particularly somebody who will never do a great concert or anything like that, but I play every day. I love it. It's only for me. I'm very sort of 1 minute I'm on this bit of music, the next minute that, and I'm not preparing any piece for anybody because I don't care, and I love that, and it's my creativity, and it's very exciting. I think it's very sad that people think that creativeness is a genius thing. I don't think it is. I think it's something much more prevalent, and I think people need to feel more comfortable about, say, well, I'm going to do some sewing, or what do you think about that?
Well, again, you're saying a lot of important things, and I make one choice out of the 24, and that means that I will not say anything about the 23 other dimensions of this particular subject.
I like this.
Yeah. So I would say that the way you conceive of something determines your behavior. For instance, what you conceive as being what's proper, the feeling of propriety. You grow up in a place like Brazil, and most people greet themselves with kisses on the cheek. Even, you go to a dinner party and you're meeting somebody for the first time. And when I was growing up, every woman would kiss on the cheek every other woman. Every man and every woman would kiss each other, but the men would not kiss the men. That was kind of taboo. But you grew up in a culture where, generally speaking, you greet by by kissing on the cheek. In some other culture, that would be considered scandalous, dirty, kind of, you molesting me. If I try to kiss somebody at a dinner party that I have not met, an English woman or an American woman, it's molestation. That means that your conception determines your behavior. If you conceive of politeness as kiss on the cheek, you will do something. And if you conceive of politeness as space, you're going to do something else. So conception determines behavior. It's a very big deal. Yeah. And the conception, you can define any one thing in a narrow manner or in a broad manner. Let's take, for instance, the idea of health. And let's imagine some doctor of a certain school who says, health is very simple. If your weight is okay, and if your red blood cell count is good, cholesterol, and your breathing capacity, if you have those 4 things, hey, you're healthy. Mm-hmm. And somebody will say, no, health is everything in your life. Everything that you're doing or thinking or eating or wearing is going to have an effect on your health. That's a very broad definition of health. Yeah. The narrow one says it's just 4 numbers. The broad one says it's everything. Yeah. And that's also true of creativity. You can define it very narrowly and say it's a professional skill for artists, and that's going to be very narrow. Or you can define it very broadly, and you can say to be alive is to be creative. A baby's creative. A cat and a dog, a husky is very creative. A bird is creative. And you and I are being creative just by saying hello to each other. Yes. And if you define things broadly, you're going to behave in a certain way. If you define things narrowly, you're going to behave in another way. And you cannot really change your behavior if you don't change your conception. So what I would say, and I think this could be the conclusion to our meeting, it's an invitation to redefinition. You can define health in a way that's going to suit you. You can define creativity in a way that's going to be helpful to you. Yeah. And you can define Alexandria technique broadly in a way that's going to be helpful to you and to those core learners who come your way because of fate and destiny.
Yes, I like that. That's very good. That's very interesting. Well, I mean, yes, we could finish it there, but I just wanted to ask one thing more. And that was, you seem to be, and you always have seemed to be very sort of, should we say, abstract or very philosophical in your approach. I mean, are there some particular people that you read and that you're inspired by that you might like to share with people? I mean, I'm actually just getting into, a bit of the old philosophy, reading about it. Uh-huh. And I do find it very interesting. Is that something that you're interested in?
Well, my dear Nicholas, I am afraid to tell you this, but I must tease you a little bit here. And you've just said that I'm a bit abstract in my approach, but to begin with, you said I pull chairs from other people. How concrete is that? So your view of my person seems to be contradictory. Well, pulling the chair from under somebody is very concrete. Now you're telling me that I'm very abstract. Now that I finished teasing you, I'll give you a very simplified answer. Very simplified. In the past few years, in the past couple of decades, little by little, sometimes more, sometimes less, I have become very interested in the work of Carl Jung. Yeah. And I have read his books. And I also have read books by one of his collaborators, Marie-Louise von Franz, who was a fantastic communicator, wrote many books. So I read 5 or 6 books by von Franz, maybe 3 or 4 books by Jung. And I frequent a Jungian who is very, very helpful to me. And the subject's much greater than Jung, but you asked me, tell me about your influences. And I would say there are very many. I could talk about Jorge Luis Borges. Oh, he's a big influence. Big deal. Borges, well, yeah. But let's leave Borges aside and let's say Carl Jung and his collaborators, big deal in my life.
Did you come across that great book, Chinese book, The Yi King? Or the I Ching?
I have it here, right behind me in my bookshelf, which doesn't have a lot of books.
You've read Jung's
but not important. Jung.
You think so?
Yeah, not to me.
No, I've always been a great lover of it, and I particularly like Jung's forward in that book,
Uh-huh.
where we were talking a bit earlier about fate and free will, and I'm very interested in that subject. And of course, I suppose what he's talking about in that is the
Let
fact.
me retract and revise my response. First, I wasn't thinking of the I Ching, but the Tao Te Ching. That's a whole other book.
That's the other.
And yeah, I have the Tao Te Ching here, and I have the I Ching here.
Yeah.
And the I Ching is a big fat book with a lot of information, and I don't know much of what's in the book. So I'm going to put in a completely different way, and I think this is going to be the last thing that we'll do. We could talk forever and ever and ever, but let's contain this thing here.
Sure.
I'm going to say that there's power in numbers.
Mm.
And there's a really big difference between 3 and 4. And there's a very big difference between 6 and 7. And there's a very big difference between 12 and 13.
Yeah.
And if you have some dream and something's happening, and you said, I entered this room and there were 5 people in the room, there's meaning to the 5 people in the room, to the number 5. And King can help you try to figure out what your unconscious is trying to tell you. So I think numbers are a very big deal. And
right.
And yeah, very big deal. And I developed a whole thing having to do with the power of 4, like you can use 4 elements to clarify something, or yeah. So one day, let's say 2 years from now, you can interview me again and ask me about the power of 4. Perhaps by then I will have finished developing the theme and written a book. Right now, I'm just saying numbers are a big deal.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I think it's been very interesting talking to you. I mean, of course, it was exactly as well, not exactly, but it was quite as I had imagined, because I knew that we would not be talking in a very tedious way. And it's been very interesting, and it always is very interesting talking to you, Pedro. And I really do appreciate your time, and of course I do appreciate the offer of interviewing you again in 2 years' time.
That's
I will keep you to that. I'm trying to build this channel up on YouTube. Not necessarily as solely an Alexander Technique channel, but as a channel that is very interesting. And I'm very grateful for your contribution to that today. And I think it has been very interesting. And I hope that other people will have found it interesting in the same way, and perhaps would like to find out more about your work. And on that matter, your information will be below the video, so that if anybody does want to find out more about your they can do that.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much, Pedro.
Thanks for inviting me.